Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at one of the most misunderstood cards in tarot, the Hierophant. For many readers this card can feel uncomfortable. It's often associated with organised religion, authority, rules and tradition. But as we'll see today, different artists and deck creators can completely transform how this card feels while still preserving its core message. As this is a card that over time has actually changed quite a lot, I'm going to just talk briefly about the history of this card. So in the earliest decks, such as the Visconti Sforza, this card was more commonly called the Pope. The figure represented religious authority and spiritual structure of medieval society. The Pope was seen as a bridge between the divine and ordinary people, a keeper of the sacred knowledge and tradition. When we move to the Tarot de Marseille, from the 18th century, the Pope here is still called the Pope, and we still see a religious leader seated before followers, blessing them and transmitting established wisdom. The Rider-Waite Smith deck made an important shift. Although the imagery remains heavily influenced by church symbolism, Arthur Waite renamed the card the Hierophant, moving the emphasis away from a specific religious office and towards a broader idea of a spiritual teacher, guide or initiator. Today many modern decks take that evolution even further. Some barely reference organised religion at all. Instead they focus on mentorship, spiritual learning, personal philosophy and the search for meaning. So let's start with the Rider-Waite Smith card. The Hierophant sits between two pillars, wearing a triple crown and making a traditional blessing gesture. At his feet are cross keys, symbolising access to sacred mysteries, and it's also a symbol of St. Peter for the keys to heaven. Before him kneel two followers, suggesting initiation into a tradition or established system of knowledge. Traditionally, this card represents spiritual teachings, institutions such as churches, tradition, formal education, ritual and ceremony, and conformity to established norms. But what interests me most is the feel of this card. For me, the Rider-Waite Hierophant feels formal and hierarchical. There is a clear distinction between teacher and student, authority and seeker. This is someone who already possesses the answers. Whether that's reassuring or restrictive depends very much on the question being asked. Sometimes we genuinely need established wisdom. Sometimes we need someone who has walked the path before us. But there is also a sense that knowledge must be received through recognised channels. So moving on to Light Seer's Tarot. This card makes a dramatically different approach. There's no throne, there's no robes, there are no followers. Instead we see a figure sitting before a staircase that rises toward a radiant light. Spiritual symbols float around the image, representing various traditions and belief systems. And what is immediately striking about this card is the feeling of joy. Unlike the Rider-Waite version, this figure isn't positioned as an authority over others. Instead, they appear to be experiencing a deep connection with spiritual truth themselves. The staircase is a wonderful metaphor. Spiritual growth isn't handed down from above, it's climbed step by step. In fact, I think the figure here is inviting you to join him walking up that staircase to enlightenment. Compared with the Rider-Waite Smith deck, this Hierophant feels much more personal and experiential. And the message shifts from listen to the teacher to become the student of life. There is still wisdom and learning here, but the emphasis is on inner awakening rather than external authority. Next, we move on to the Moon Void Tarot, and we are moving into very different territory. At first glance, this card is almost stark in its simplicity. There's no figure at all. We have a crystal ball sitting atop a stack of books. Above it are the phases of the moon. At the base sits a pair of spectacles. This is one of the most stripped down Hierophant cards that you'll encounter, yet it communicates a remarkable amount. The books suggest accumulated knowledge and teaching. The spectacles imply study, observation and understanding. The crystal ball introduces intuition, while the moon phases suggest cycles, mystery and hidden wisdom. And also intuition, the moon in tarot always means intuition. What's fascinating is there's no teacher, no throne, no followers, no hierarchy. The authority has become knowledge itself. This Hierophant feels scholarly, but also deeply esoteric. It suggests someone who learns through study, contemplation and direct engagement with wisdom and traditions rather than through obedience to an institution. Compared with Waite Smith, this card feels quieter, more private and more self-directed. Next, we move on to the Hierophant from the Muse Tarot. And this one is probably the most challenging interpretation to interpret of the four. We see a hooded figure approaching a monumental seated form. Lanterns float across the landscape and a vast geometric pattern radiates behind the scene. This card feels like dreamlike, mythical and almost visionary. Like the certainty of the Waite Smith or the clarity of Moon Void, Muse leans heavily into mystery. The enormous seated figure reminds me of an archetype rather than a person. It feels like wisdom made manifest. Not a teacher you can simply ask questions of, but a force that must be approached with humility. Maybe we can also think of this like an oracle, like the Delphic oracle, where you would go and ask questions of a higher authority. The tiny hooded figure creates a sense of pilgrimage, and this is spiritual seeking on a grand scale. The floating lights feel like offerings, prayers or individual sparks of consciousness moving towards a greater truth. For me, this card transforms a Hierophant into an encounter with the sacred itself. Where Waite asks us to learn from tradition, Muse asks us to stand in awe before something bigger than ourselves. When we place these cards side by side, it's remarkable how differently they approach the same archetype. So, Waite Smith is the guardian of tradition and established wisdom. Light Seers, a joyful seeker ascending towards spiritual understanding. Moon Void, accumulated knowledge, study and personal exploration. And the Muse, a mystical encounter with something vast, eternal and sacred. Yet despite their differences, all four cards share a common thread. Each one asks us how we relate to wisdom. Do we seek it from teachers? Do we discover it through personal experience? Do we find it in books and study? Or do we encounter it through mystery, intuition and awe? That's why I think the Hierophant is more interesting than its reputation suggests. It isn't simply about conformity or organised religion. At its heart, it's about how human beings connect with meaning, knowledge and spiritual truth. So, in the comments, tell me about which card you prefer of these. And what do you think the Hierophant is telling us? Do you think it is organisation, self-learning, contact with the spiritual, or a journey? Please let me know. To finish, this is the Hierophant card from the Llewellyn Tarot. In the comments, let me know what type of card this is. Do you think this is a spiritual teacher? Do you think it's organised religion? Do you think it's showing you the way to enlightenment? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.